23 years old, and I had a top secret clearance, and I could classify and declassify. Now, I was 23 years old. Move forward to now I'm 41, and I'm a senator of the United States, and I'm told by the leadership of the Senate that all I can do is read these top secret papers, and I can't take notes. Now, how ridiculous did you think that occurred in my mind, that this is the height of silliness? So when Ellsberg called and asked if I would use the papers, I said yes, immediately. And I said, hang up, because I had some sense of intelligence, having been an intelligence officer, that I didn't know if he's being bugged or if I'm being bugged or what have you. So let's shut this thing down quickly before they can make any traces. And the rest, obviously, is history. Now, let's now move forward beyond my own experiences and talk about your experiences and talk about the experience of the nation. Because what people would say, in fact, Ellsberg's publishers, when he published his book Secrets, asked if I would write a little piece for the cover. And the question was, and Dan had asked me personally if I would do this, and Dan said, well, they're really interested as to what they think the situation is today. Has anything changed as a result of what we did? Well, the first thing I wrote in this paragraph was, nothing has changed. In fact, if anything, it's gotten worse. And so when you begin to wonder why, after this unbelievable cataclysmic event from a media point of view, that didn't shake up the nation enough to change its ways, then you have to ask yourself the question, will it change its ways at all? Sure it has. I filibustered, forced the end of the draft. What was the unintended consequence of that? Blackwater. We had more troops of a private nature in Iraq than we had with uniforms on. And that's how we operate around the world. It's little wonder that the President of the United States has a Praetorian Guard every bit as vicious and as powerful as the Praetorian Guard under Rome. This is a secret army the President has at his disposal. And it's not generally understood by the public. And so what we see today is what's happened with the media. This was the last glorious day of the free press of the Fourth Estate. You saw it there. It ended there. It ended there. The New York Times was complicit in sanctifying our invasion of Iraq. So was the Washington Post. If you want to know about what's going on with Iran in a negative sense, read the Post, read the New York Times, read the American media, CNN, what have you, and you find out that there's a broad conspiracy in the Fourth Estate that we will not violate the trust of the government. And what it shows is there's a complete ignorance of what that trust is. It wasn't mentioned here, but it was. We see it with Manning, Chelsea Manning. We see it with Julian Assange. We see it with one of the greatest heroes and the brightest young men I've ever heard of, which was Snowden, Edward Snowden. Now, what Snowden did, taking a lesson, he must have watched this movie 3 or 4 times, because he developed his strategy based upon the conclusions of this. And that is, I have a body of top secret materials. I don't think I'm qualified to make a judgment as to what should be released publicly or not. So therefore, what Snowden did, he released it to the responsible press as he viewed the responsible press, Greenwald and Guardian and what have you, not the New York Times, not the Post, because they just kept shuffling this under the table. And so you now have a situation where we don't have in our democracy a Fourth Estate that's prepared to defend the right of the people to know. Now, the right of the First Amendment speech and for the media, that's one thing. But there's another thing that all members of the government swear to. And it's not obedience to the president. It's not obedience to the military. It's what a 22-year-old corporal figured out in his own mind, that what I did is I took an oath of office to defend the Constitution of the United States from threats from within and without. And this was all about a threat from within. And that's the situation we find ourselves in today as a society and as a democracy that's been eviscerated because the forces of evil, every time we have made a move in society, they've been able to block it, and change it, and twist and turn. And so we got us to where we're at right now, where 50% of the American people don't care, don't know, and don't want to know. And for good reason, because there's nothing they can do about it. I always joke with Dan when we're together. I said, Dan, the reason why you're always getting yourself arrested is because you're expiating your sins. Well, I was never for the war, so I don't have to run around getting arrested to prove that I'm a pacifist. I can just articulate it in speech. I don't have to get arrested to do that. And that's what I try to do as I travel around the world. It's got to the point in my personal career that I can get easy press abroad. And I was just appointed to an executive position in a corporation. And would you believe, it warranted an article in Paris Match in the Times of London. I got calls from people in South America. And so my aura, so to speak, has permeated worldwide. But in the United States, I could put out a press release, and I've done this repeatedly, making a statement about something that I felt was important. Doesn't get covered by the media. Oh, it gets covered extensively by the sub-media, but not by the media that counts, which is the media that continually whitewashes and scrubs down the American psyche into the acceptance of what we have today in our society. And that is a government, and I say this advisedly, that is corrupt to the core. And a person would say, well, Guy, how can you say that? You know, where's your sense of patriotism? The sense of patriotism was exhibited by Chelsea Manning, 22 years old, who could reason that he's watching these things come across his desk, and the analysis, and it's that variance from what the president is saying, or the generals are saying, or the Congress is saying. And what does this 22-year-old kid say? Well, I've got to stand up, and I took an oath of office. So they incarcerate him for 35 years. Stop and think of the injustice of that. They take this is like Genghis Khan. When people would bring him bad news, he would pour molten gold in their ears. Well, we're doing the same thing as a democracy. We take a young man and shuffle him away for 35 years who had the perspicuity, the judgment, to understand what underlies our democracy. And then we see that even more deftly handled by Snowden, who recognizes he can't go through all these papers. I had that same difficulty. I brought in 5 or 6 staff people into my living room for 3 days to read through the papers and then bring to because I'm dyslexic and there's no way I could do this in a month of Sundays. So to be able to report to me, well, here's the name and what do you think of it? And so I would look at it, I'd read around it, and I'd make a judgment whether to keep the name in or take it out. So we went through the entire papers that way over a three-day period, because I took my responsibilities as a leader, an elected official, that we shouldn't dump it all out. However, I've come to a much different view now. Certainly the best dumping was done by Snowden, because what he did, he took the information he had, which was top secret, and turned it over to responsible media people and said, now you make the decisions of what should be released or not released. Most people don't understand the nuance of that decision by Snowden, which in my mind was unbelievably precocious and brilliant in its handling. Now, fortunately, he had people like Greenwald, who was very courageous and had insulated himself by living in Brazil, so that he was subject to the same controls. And plus, he had credibility with The Guardian. In fact, the last op-ed piece I got published was with The Guardian. I couldn't get it published in the Post or the Times or anything like that. So what we come down to is trying to analyze what has happened to our country and why. And it's pretty simple and very straightforward. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so you have politicians who can stay in Washington for a generation, 30, 40 years, and are lauded for it, and they're put their names on highways and on airports. It's a sickening process when you stop and think that they're there because they can raise the money from people who have the money, who want influence on public policy, and then they get elected and they honor that commitment they have to the people that have money. Think of how embarrassing it is for us as Americans to see this Edelman character who's got these casinos in Macau and in Las Vegas, who dangles money in front of politicians, and all of the Republican candidates have gone and genuflected to this horrible human being. Now, what has this approach to secrecy done to us? Well, what it's done to us, it brought us into Iraq. It brought us into an attitude that we tolerate American imperialism. And American imperialism is imperialism like any other imperialism. It's cruel, it's vicious, it's warlike, it's warmongering, and it does this wantonly. Yeah. And so you say, well, where's the American people? Well, where were the American people when we went into Iraq? Where was their leadership? We had members of Congress. The only time in my life that I wished I was a member of Congress again was in October of when the decision was made to invade Iraq. This was done by the Democratic leadership in the Congress, mind you. They can't point to the Republicans. That's the reason why I was driven out of the campaign when I ran for president, is I was talking about that we were making these same mistakes as the Democratic Party. And so, lo and behold, we find ourselves going from one war to the other, and we find ourselves overtaken by the neocons, the conservative nuts who are out there in the highest positions of government, whether they're in the Nixon administration, whether they're in the Johnson administration, or now the George Bush administration, and now the Obama administration. There's no difference. There is really no change. I wish I could tell you that, yeah, things are improved. Washington is learning its lessons. The people in the United States are learning their lessons. In point of fact, they're not. We have not learned any lessons from what you just saw here, which can bring tears to our eyes. They talk about 2 million people in Southeast Asia. During the course of my presidential campaign, John McCain was on the floor of the Senate making a speech in debate with Joe Biden and saying that Mike Gravel, when he was senator, was responsible for killing 3 million people in Southeast Asia. That's John McCain. And you can still take up the Wall Street Journal of yesterday and read a column and see these outright lies and fabrications that are published in a major newspaper. You'd think that they have fact checkers that can look into some of this stuff. Of course they do, but they don't. And so all I can leave you with is not with a very positive rendering from this experience. I'm reminded of the words of Will and Oriel Durant and several other major unusual historians who in later life, in their dotage, where I'm located now, they have an attitude that there's not much hope for civilization. And I would have that attitude, except that I'm a generic optimist. And so I can't countenance it, but I can certainly reason it and see it happening before our very eyes. And I know that you feel frustrated because obviously you're committed to the values that we shared and that were shared in this film, but that's not enough. And I concluded in my experience as a theorist in governance that the answer does not lie with the leadership, it lies with the American people, or with the people of the entire world. I always resent the fact that, okay, you know, we got to show an American being killed so that there's a reaction in Washington. What about other human beings? What about the human beings in Iraq, which are mutilated and destroyed because of what we do with our tax dollars worldwide? Most Americans don't know or even appreciate the consequences that we have 133 countries within which we stationed uniformed American military personnel. What does that mean? Now, will we go the route of all empires? No question about it. The question is what's the transition going to be between the American hegemonic power in the world being transferred to Asia and primarily in the hands of China? Will they acquit themselves better than we have acquitted ourselves? Maybe. They have a theory of governance which works for them at this point in time. We have a theory of governance which has been mutilated, and we claim we're going around the world to fight for democracy, and that's the silliest lie of all. If you've heard a lot of lies here, that's the one you want to take home, that's not what we do in the world today, is bring about democracy. What we do is what the four horsemen of the apocalypse have done, who fight, pestilence, what are the four horsemen? Pestilence, war, and two others. What?
Family, death.
Okay. Well, let me close on that note and open up to question and answers, which is a lot easier for me because I can focus on what you want to know about. Because up to this point, I'm focusing on what I want to convey to you, which isn't all that positive, and I apologize because it's not all that positive. I tried to change it. Thank you, sir.